seeing if we have any conflicts of interests. There being none, any announcements by the Mayor? No. And announcements by management? Any minor matters? Right, there being none, we will move on to confirmation of the minutes, that the minutes of the Future Napier Committee held on Thursday the 30th of July be taken as a true and correct record. Moved Councillor Mawson, seconded Councillor Taylor. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Carried. Right, I'd like to welcome up Yvonne and Richard, who are going to come. Oh, sorry, Dean. We're moving straight into the district plan review. Sorry, I was jumping to my next item, number 2. Sorry, Dean. So our district plan review and adoption of our policy approaches.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This is just another follow-up on a series of seminars that we've had with Council between July and August of this year. And these seminars have been based on pre-engagement feedback from key stakeholders who are sort of affected by particular provisions of the plan more than the general public. So the topics include heritage, character precincts, potential rezonings in Ahuriri, landscapes and greenfield growth in the hills. So in terms of the heritage items groups, we engaged, it was COVID interrupted first lot of engagement, which basically had to be postponed for several months. COVID interrupted second run engagement as well, so it just caused a bit of a timing issue, but we did receive feedback from interested parties and the owners of properties who were affected by it. Heritage items received about 14 comments from owners of heritage items or groups of heritage items. And the recommendation for that is to include all of the heritage items and groups for inclusion in the district plan, so that the general public have the opportunity to comment on that. A number of character precincts: Mariwa Art Deco, Mariwa State Housing, Te Awa Bungalow, Railway Housing, Napier South, Ahuriri Spit and Iron Pot. A little bit of a mixed views expressed, but there were limited numbers within each of those character precincts, so without having any views to the contrary and strong feedback around it, the recommendation is to include all of those character precincts into the district plan. There was one area that did attract quite a lot of feedback, and most of it questioning the consistency of the character in that area, and that was Battery Road. And the recommendation is to actually shrink the extent of that character precinct. It was looked at again by officers and consultants, and that would shrink it down and rename it to the Campbell Coronation Street areas of Ahuriri, and that would be renamed to the Coronation Street Character Precinct. There were a few rationalisations of rezonings proposed to sort of break up the existing mixed-use zone, which covers virtually the whole of Ahuriri at the moment. General agreement with that, sort of a series of targeted ones, sort of adding areas into sort of commercial areas where they were commercial use and residential where they were residential use. And there was one point of dispute, and that was in relation to the bulk oil facilities and the land immediately adjoining it to the sort of the west and the north. So the recommendation around that one is to promote the rezonings in the discussion document, with the exception of that bulk oil facility where there'll be a bit more work being done. But at this stage, because what the feedback received was from the bulk oil operators, which is Z Energy and BP, they've done a risk assessment in terms of an event of low probability but high impact, and it's based on an Australian risk assessment. There is no sort of risk assessment model within New Zealand itself. But there are parts of New Zealand, Auckland and Christchurch which have implemented a risk profile around those type of facilities. And so the recommendation is to do a little bit more work, receive a peer review around that risk assessment, and that particular zoning would stay as a mixed use zone rather than go into an industrial zone as promoted in that discussion document. But depending on the scale of the response, which is yet to be determined, the idea would be to sort of either have a precinct applying specifically around risk assessment contours, or if it's only one or two provisions, then it's a special control area where there's just a bespoke sort of rule would apply just in relation to that risk. So it's a sort of a scale issue. If there's quite a significant number of things, it would be a precinct, but if it's just one or two things, then it would be a special control area. Landscapes, there was not many, only a few general comments around the landscapes, but it was sort of tied into the greenfield growth in the hills in terms of response received. And I guess the feedback was along the lines of, well, if there is going to be growth in the hills, we'd like to retain the sort of open nature of the hilltops, the ridge lines. So the recommendation is to include a 60-metre contour line in the Taradale Hills as the demarcation where new development would need to consider those landscape values. Greenfield growth in the hills received 15 comments, most of them in supporting the idea in principle, but there were all sort of like criteria around how and when how it should be applied. We have received feedback from the consultants engaged to develop structure plans for the most likely areas to be developed in those hills for how growth could be accommodated. And the results at this stage are coming through that the yield and the costs are quite high. The yields are low and the costs are high for running linear infrastructure into those areas. So the recommendation for that one is just to await a final report and the structure plans from those consultants, and that would allow council to take into wider considerations around the sort of outputs coming through from the infrastructure teams on the 3 water master plans, because they may sort of generate sort of feedback where actually the costs may not be disproportionate to what would be happening on the flat land versus the hills. But on the face of it at this stage, it is a sort of an expensive option, even though it may be a desirable option. And there was one other seminar just capturing up the subdivision and earthworks provisions, and the recommendation on that one is not to put new significant policy direction into the draft plan, but I'm sure there will be sort of feedback on that and requests for reconsideration of that sort of stuff, but more guidance on how to achieve better outcomes around the subdivision and earthworks. So that's really the sort of framework. There are sort of some issues sort of still remaining in terms of having sort of requirements to have sort of further engagement with particular stakeholders. That bulk oil facility and the risk assessment around that is one such example, but there are a few others there and they're listed there at 1.3. So yeah, so happy to take questions.
Thank you, Dean. Quick question from me to start with. So clarification on page 4 when we talk about the Ahuriri potential rezoning. The mixed use zone, the one that we're around Coronation Street that we're proposing to stay, a mixed use zone. When we talk about introducing a new condition into that zone around sensitive activities, would that apply to all of the mixed use zone or just a bespoke one related to that identified property?
Yeah, so it's sort of it's risk contours, so it's basically sort of the circles around the bulk oil facilities, so some of those impact potentially on existing residential, existing industrial type development. So it would be, depending on the scale of the response necessary to address and alleviate the concerns with that, it may be just a special control area where there's a specific rules which would apply just in those risk contours. So
yeah, so we're not talking about any risk to other activities in a mixed use zone by introducing words along the lines of sensitive activities and effects of that?
No, not outside the risk contours. So the rule would be, if it is a special control area, drafted along the lines of just a specific rule that would apply just within those risk contours, not within the zone. But as I say, if there's enough further response required to be a bit more sort of specific and directive, or having to have their own objectives and policies, and it sort of scales up in a sense, and you have a precinct, once again, only applying in terms of the risk contours. The risk contours would set the limitations of where any provisions would apply.
I understand, thank you. Are there any other questions? Councillor Tapani, followed by Councillor Brown.
Greetings, Dean. Thank you very much for all the work you're continuing to do on our district plan, and as you'll go forward in the next couple of years, so kia kaha iho. couple of things I have around this first question is a bit of a sideline question. It's a follow-on from Deputy Mayor's question around that particular site. It's not specific to your paper, but it's something I'd like you to come back to me on, and that's around the low probability, high impact. Just around confidence, given the contents of those containers, do they also have a follow-up policy on what to do in the event of a high impact, and where are the resources for that, or will we be left in the lurch? I'm just conscious of other environmental disasters globally and the time it takes to put in place a response. So that sits right on our coast, right in the heart of our city. Low probability, high impact. The high impact will spread with the water. So I'd love to get some information from the team sometime around what resources we have in order to mitigate that high impact. So it's not directly connected to the paper, and if that fits within our scope, I'd love to get some information at some time around that.
All right.
So
Richard?
So by high impact, low probability, they're talking 1 in a million event.
1 in a million years?
Yeah,
Statistic?
1 in a million statistical event. So it is a very low probability, and what we are doing through the district plan is identifying what that actually means in terms of the lines on the map of things that we should be avoiding, and really in terms of the response to that is firmly in their court as the exacerbator, as it would be with anybody else.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Further questions, please, Deputy Mayor? Your landscapes, could you help me understand where significant natural areas lie within that category? Because I remember the conversation, the team identified some potential significant natural areas. Are they a part of our landscapes? Have they been incorporated, or will that be another stream of work?
What I'll do is answer that. So we did have that as a part of this paper. There are some ongoing discussions with affected residents, and so we've decided to push outstanding natural areas into the next update on the district plan. So you will see that come through in future.
All bananas?
And sorry, through the chair, just to clarify, so the significant natural areas are their own individual overlay.
Okay.
So overlays apply throughout the district where there's more than one site impacted by it. So the significant natural areas are their own overlay, and the landscapes have their own overlay as well.
Supplementary? So could you just, for my own sake really, just explain a little bit more of the difference between landscapes and SNAs?
So, through you, Chair, so SNAs are relating to Indigenous biodiversity. There's a national policy statement which is in a draft form and is expected to be passed into a final policy statement next year, and it's I guess expressing concern at a governmental level throughout the country that there's not a lot of Indigenous biodiversity and protection provided to it. So it's creating a sort of raising the bar, if you like, in terms of requiring, through the regional councils and then district councils to identify and protect significant natural areas. Did that answer your question?
It does. Thank you very much, Dean. No further questions from me. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Brown.
My question's essentially been asked.
Okay. Councillor Bogue, followed by Her Worship.
Yes, thank you very much, and I reiterate what Councillor Tapani said. Thank you very much to the staff. We've been presented with some really comprehensive information. I know you've done a huge amount of work to pull this together. My question, I've got a couple of questions. One's concerning, there's been a debate recently over the Wellington spatial plan that I've been watching in the media, and the topic is that because houses, old, cold, expensive houses near the inner city are classified as heritage, they are unable to be developed into safe, dry, affordable houses by developers, which, considering the pressing need we have, and Wellington even more so, for affordable houses, does the draft plan allow or encourage, does it enable houses that are classified as either heritage or in the character precinct to be removed and replaced with new houses?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there's a distinction between heritage and character areas. So heritage is a matter of national importance, and so the heritage items, which is the first item or on the page 4, actually identifies individual buildings and also groups of buildings. The next one, the character precincts, is a layer below that, and it's more of a comes into an amenity consideration. It's been the best practice to try and sort of preserve those areas and try and retain the character of them, and the communities typically have been quite supportive of that approach. The new National Policy Statement on Urban Development, which is in place, is proposing to sort of reduce the ability of councils to rely on protecting character areas. So it's an issue that we would be expecting debate to be raised through the draft plan and onto the proposed plan. So it'll be an interesting process to see where and how that lands. But remember, these are only representative examples. They're not right across the city. They're quite small areas. So the rest of the city doesn't have any such encumbrance in terms of having protection around character and amenity as a consideration. So yeah, it's an issue that's it's going to be keenly discussed and probably is reflective of what you're hearing out of Wellington at the moment. So it'll be up to the councillors to...
Thank you, good answer. Just the other one, I noticed there's a legislative change recently on the need for having 2 carports. Does that feed into our district plan somehow?
Yeah, so it does. The National Policy Statement on Urban Development requires us to remove all minimum car parking requirements within 18 months of notification of that National Policy Statement. So the time's ticking already. We can go ahead of that time if the council so desires. So it's just it's a means to try and sort of break down some of the barriers to providing more intensive housing, and I presume it's most likely going to be sort of reflected around the centre of town rather than sort of in the suburban areas. And it's also a means to try and sort of get people more into the public transport mode by not actually requiring cars to be provided. So it just sort of it's sort of a multi-pronged approach to try and sort of change behaviour.
Cool, thank you.
Thank you, Dean. Mayor Wise.
Through the Chair, just a more general question regarding the district plan review and the timeline of when we're intending to go out for consultation with our community. Just very conscious that we will be also consulting on our long-term plan in the foreseeable future, and we also have quite a number of significant projects which will require separate consultations as well. So a bit of an update on what the timelines are for the district plan consultation.
Yeah, so through you, Chair, I guess it's a work in progress at the moment. So we're trying to sort of gather all the work streams together. There are some sort of issues that are sort of a bit delayed in terms of the response. We'll blame that on COVID. But no, there are a lot of work streams that need to come together so that the actual district plan can get that coordinated feel to it. So, you know, with financial contributions relies on structure plans, which relies on the delivery of the 3 waters master plan, so that there are a lot of pieces of the puzzle still to come. So the intention was to try and get a draft plan notified around November of this year, but we'll just see how we go in terms of actually having a meaningful document that would be able to be presented at that time, or whether there needs to be some sort of movement in that time frame.
And Richard, we've discussed a strategy for consultation.
Yeah, it's a really great point. We've got a very big program across the council in terms of even, you know, outside of the LTP. There's a number of things that we're engaging with the community on, and there's no point in overloading them with the district plan in an untimely way. A lot of the consultation with the draft is quite focused in particular groups, so it's not necessarily across the whole of every Napier resident. But outside of that, we would be very carefully making sure that we have a window that is not occupied by a number of other projects, particularly the LTP.
Thank you.
Councillor Crystal.
Through the Chair, how will the reformation of the RMA affect our district plan? Is that going to change? You know, like, I know that's like a very open question, but Obviously, if that significant changes come in, it could significantly change what happens with the district plan.
Councillor Christo, I might direct that to Richard. We've had a recent conversation about that.
It's a really great question. There's a couple of things that are important, I think. One is that the report that has been done is a report. So neither, it is not a select committee or anything like that. There is no legislation, even though we know that that I think both sides of the House will do something. What that actually means and what that translates into is anybody's guess. Around the country, there's a variety of opinions actually around whether people should be progressing their district plans or not. I think everyone around the table is aware that we're under some pressing issues, particularly with urban development, that we really can't afford not to just sit on our hands in terms of progressing a district plan that allows the city to grow in a sensible way. And all we're doing really is holding things back by not having that thinking out there in the community. And in terms of the longer term view, it'll be certainly some years away before district plans are done away with and changed for some other thing. If you think that the legislation has to come in first, passed by the House, then enacted at the top level, and then it filters through down into the councils. The way that report reads to me is that probably signals local government reform as well. So there's a lot of things need to happen before district plans don't become viable anymore. So I think in general, the progress that we're making with the thinking around the district plan would, whatever vehicle there is into the future, would need to accommodate those kind of things anyway. And it's well worth the effort, we would say, wouldn't we, Dean?
Yeah, and just to add to that, I mean, there has been a legal requirement to have a district plan since about the 1920s, and there will be some requirement to have some form of plan, whatever that is, right into the future. And I guess the feeling is, from an practitioner's point of view, is depending on which government of the day is in power, there are changes to the RMA, and then some of them are undone and they come back into play and out of play. So it's a huge legislation that has been changed. So we just have to push on with what we've got and see what happens. As Richard said, it's a lot of big processes to go to negate the requirement to have a district plan, and just that national policy statement on urban development is very prescriptive in requiring us to get on and do things in the here and now, not wait for something to happen in the future.
Thank you, Dane. Councillor Brown, did you have a question?
Yeah, I decided I would ask it after all. So just back to the Ahuriri bulk oil facilities, I'm just quite aware that we talked around the risk. So I just wondered, in plain English, are we talking about an oil spill or an explosion? And then following on from that, we talk about bespoke conditions. Are they conditions that we're putting on the bulk oil facility or the residents around that?
Yeah, so I guess we haven't quite got to that position in terms of where those requirements lie, but the resource management does have a provision that you do have, in effect, is something of low probability but high impact. So this is one of those examples. The oil facilities do everything they can, and they have huge health and safety requirements to manage the risk on site. It's just that they can't be 100% certain that everything will go perfectly. So there is a risk. It's a very low risk, but there is a risk. So we need to try and sort of understand the impact of that risk, what the bulk oil facilities technical assessment is. It's highly technical. It's not something that would be easily understood, well, by me. So the general public will be struggling, I'm sure. So we need to sort of understand exactly how it works. The peer review process will probably hopefully help sort of clarify some of those risks. And then we'd need to convey that information to stakeholders who are impacted by it, because it's a new provision. It hasn't been in existence before. So the risk is, I guess, there is a spillage and then there's an explosion. That's probably the biggest risk. And we've all seen how bad they can be in some instances. Hopefully it's nothing of that scale, and certainly the risk contours that have been identified at this preliminary stage are not something that impact well beyond the site, but they do impact activities beyond the site. So does that answer all your questions? Or?
I think so, thank you.
Thank you, Dean and councillors. Could I ask for a mover to the officer's recommendation that we endorse the recommended policy approach in the report for preparing the draft district plan for the purpose of undertaking consultation and engagement with our community? Do I have a mover? Councillor Brown, Councillor Tapani. Would either of you like to speak to the motion?
Just to say that there's a huge amount of work that's gone into this, and it's really great that we've done the pre-engagement with the community and got their feedback before we're going out to them for another lot of engagement. So it's really appreciative of all the work that's gone into to get to this point.
Thank you. Councillor Tapani.
Really only to reiterate the points of Councillor Brown, and just to note your particular experience, Dean, and what you've brought to this progress and project so far. Your expertise has been clearly demonstrated throughout the workshops, and you've taken us very diligently through all the various aspects. So I just want to acknowledge your experience and contribution to this program, and I look forward to seeing you continue in that space in the next 2 years.
Through you, Chair, it's not just me, there's a team behind me. I can't claim all that credit. I think there's other people who deserve that accolade as well. So
thank you, Dean.
And one of them sitting just down in the back there, Yvonne, will be presenting the next report.
Point well made. Thank you, Dean.
Thank you, Dean.
I'm not seeing anyone else wishing to speak, so with that I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Carried. Thank you, Dean. We'll move on to item 2, which is terms of reference for our Ahuriri Regional Park Working Group. I'd like to welcome Yvonne Lagarth, who's going to present the paper. And I'd also like to introduce to Council our co-chair of our working group, Councillor Hinawai Ormsby, and ask if Hinawai would like to come and join us at the table for this paper as well. Kia ora. Thank you, Yvonne.
Hi. So this paper deals with the terms of reference for a joint working group that's called to the Ahuriri Regional Park Working Group. It is a combined working group of staff and councillors from the Regional Council and Napier City. The intention of the report is to coordinate outcomes for the estuary between organisations, focusing very much on our areas of responsibility and functions.
That's you. Thank you, Yvonne, for introducing the paper. I suppose we just wanted to speak a little bit to the paper as well and acknowledge all of, I think, the hard yards that have gone into getting this group together. There have been many years and many councils, I think, who have talked about getting together to restore the mana of the estuary in various ways, and what we're talking about in this working group is pulling that together through a project on the regional park, which will, as you see in the terms of reference, pull together a range of really complex and diverse issues, a range of opportunities in there, including the treatment of our stormwater and lots of estuarine habitat opportunities around restoration and enhancement as well. And I'm just really excited, I think, about the opportunities that the working group brings. And I wonder if my co-chair would like to say anything as well.
O tēnā koutou katoa, tēnei te mihi kia koutou tēnei rā. Thank you for inviting me to this future Napier committee. It's actually quite nice to have other millennials around the table, including you, Appy. And like Annette has talked about, this is the right time for us to collaborate, and I'm really thankful that my colleagues Martin Williams and Neil Curtin are also on board in this working group. Thank you to Hayley and to Appy for also putting your hand up to work together. But I just want to go to the fifth point on the background in the terms of reference on page 9. And so if we think about the why this working group has started, it's to strengthen the collaboration between the two councils, but it's also to bring about that step change following on from the Ahuriri Estuary and Coastal Edge Master Plan that was created and endorsed in 2018. Because we know that the mauri of the estuary, which once was Te Whanganui Aorotu, has probably suffered, and we can be really honest about our legacy problems. But we have a chance now to look at restoration, protection, particularly for our biodiversity, and also our water quality that goes into the estuary. So for this, this project is something that will be close to my heart, and I think we'll be in this for the long haul. And I just thank you all for also dedicating and contributing through your annual plan to this project and into the future, our long-term plan. I know we have to all make pretty hard decisions this time next year, but I think if we start working on those legacy problems, we will get to a better place, and this is a park for ahuriri, for our people into the future. So I'm truly excited about this project. Kia ora. Any questions?
Thank you, Hinawai. We'll start with Councillor Price.
I probably one question is the Napier City Council are very, very enthusiastic about this. Have you got the same support from your full council and officers?
Definitely from our governors, we're super excited. I think with our officers, they are because we say they should be. And sometimes that takes a bit of massaging. But we in last week's meeting did put funds aside to working on this, so that's a good indicator. And we have our officers on board coming to the working group who are happy to contribute to it. So that's quite a hard question to answer.
Yeah, I know. Just to elaborate, it is something that will be easier with enthusiasm over the whole council, which I feel that we have. And I was just wondering if you had the same support.
Definitely at the governance level, that's where sometimes we operate the most.
Yeah.
In terms of the officers, yes, they're on board with us with what we're aiming to do.
Thank you.
And I think just, speaking further to that, we're trying to be the change we want to see as well with this working group. We want to see change in our estuary. We want to see change in our stormwater. We want to see, environmental improvements. And sometimes that takes a little bit of leadership. Sometimes that's a little bit hard. And we're working through that as we go. But I think you'll see in the terms of reference that we've left ourselves a really wide scope to address lots of issues and bring them back to you and bring them back to Regional Council and our mana whenua partners as we work through all of the componentry that will become this regional park. It won't just be one thing. It will be many things coming together. And I'm sure people will be on and off the waka depending on which project or component is most of interest to them as well.
Thank you.
Councillor McGrath.
Just want to defend Gen X.
What about us boomers?
Yeah, nah. Could you perhaps provide comment? I'm just having a read here, and one part mentions the chair, and the next bit mentions co-chairs. What direction are we heading in here?
Which part mentions chair? We're just one and the same, Richard. We've gone for a co-chair.
Okay.
We have gone for a co-chair, so that's our formal position.
Excellent, thank you.
Are there any other questions, comments? We'll do Councillor Bogue, Councillor Tapani.
Just something for Yvonne, just not the terms of reference, because those look great, but just something on page 8 in the preamble and the explanation, the second to last, down sort of towards the end of it, it says the Ahuriri Hapu Claim Settlement Bill has been to a select committee and is progressing through the various stages towards enactment. Now, this will come back to us in our main council meeting for, double debating, but This is just a bit out of date now. While possible, it is unlikely that the bill will be passed prior to Parliament rising on the 6th of August ahead of the elections, because as we know, it rose on the 6th of September, so it just needs to be reworded slightly, that's all.
Yes. Yep.
Thanks.
Noted. Thank you, Councillor Bogue. Councillor Tapney.
Just to follow on really, same again around mana ahuriri and an expression of an opportunity really. So really excited around what the MOU represents around how we as organisations can work more collaboratively together and create and foster spaces for our officers to do the same. But it also occurs to me that there is an opportunity for mana ahuriri to come and to provide an invitation to mana ahuriri to see whether or not they would like to give a presentation on their settlement and their aspirations on what that might mean and any alignment across this and other activities. I know that they've given a presentation to HBRC, and now that this paper refers to the legislative pathway already on its track, I'd like to float that idea amongst our committee and amongst this council around when we as a council might extend an invitation to broaden our understanding of mana ahuriri, their settlement, their impact and their aspirations, and where it might align with projects like this.
Thank you, Councillor Tapney. I think we'll take that away as an action for the relevant members of the team to have a think about how we might do that. It probably leads really nicely into a amended motion that I have to put in front of you today around the receipt of this paper, and it's really just acknowledging that we are the first party to have our terms of reference come through for the joint working group, and noting that there may be amendments made as it works through Regional Council, Mana Ahuriri, Tea Committee and our own Māori committee as well. So I'm not sure if the team have that available to go up on the board, but that is that we will receive and endorse I think they've missed off the part A that I had sent through, but that's fine. So A would be that we would receive and endorse the joint working group's terms of reference, and B would be note that there may be changes to the terms of reference as it is presented to our other partners in the group, including those 4 parties. I'm happy to move that from the chair. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Crown. Just speaking to the motion, just reiterating that this is a really exciting, groundbreaking partnership between all of these organisations, and we're really committed, I think, as a council. Thank you for your endorsement of this terms of reference to work together on that. Councillor Crown.
Thank you. Through the chair, I'm happy to support this, and once again I feel like the word exciting or excited has been used quite a few times in regards to this paper, but I'm going to use it again because I'm genuinely excited from a cultural and environmental perspective, but also from a process and systems perspective. In the terms of reference, point 6 was around us promoting alignment of the respective councils' projects and planning documents. So making sure that when we are committing to doing work together, that there's no overlap and that we are complementing each other, which I think is just a really smart way to do things. So yeah, congratulations to the working group. I know that getting things to this point takes a lot of mahi. So take my hat off to all of you, and I really look forward to seeing the modi of Te Whanganui o Orotu enhanced through your work and our work together.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak to the motion? There being none, I will put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Carried. Thank you very much. Thank you. Right, we'll move on to item 3. Okay. And Fleur gives her apologies. We'll ask Richard to introduce the paper on our internal practice note for financial contributions.
Thank you. Through the chair. Fleur would have liked to have given this paper, by the way. Anyway, I'll see if I can do it with the same enthusiasm that she would have.
Use the word excited.
Excited, yeah. And we are genuinely excited, certainly, I think, in terms of something that we're putting forward today, which we've wanted to be able to enable for some time and have struggled to find the right way of doing it, and I think we've found something now. So what this is about is that the council has always sought to have vibrancy in the CBD, and it's noted really that there are a lot of empty second floors in our CBD. That's no surprise to any of you. And COVID-19, I think, saw a notable drop again in occupancy, particularly as people started working from home and offices have been leaving the CBD. So the vibrancy issue is compounding. And the council has, through the city vision and recovery, made residential uses of the second floors as something that we all would like to see more of. And the question is, how do you do that, or how do we do that? And to be fair, to date, council has struggled to provide some good incentives to enable that use. It actually just gets bundled in the same regulation as applies to any other use in the CBD, and we struggle to untangle that and make that better for someone who wants to change a building to a residential use. We have been aware, though, that financial contributions in this area is something that other councils have waived. In fact, we have two in one particular circumstance in order to promote inner city living. And it's really this that is the subject of this paper, and really being able to give the officers the ability to have a proper look at this on a case-by-case basis. And the application that I guess the way we see this working is through the application of a practice note that would guide decision making and identify circumstances where waiving of financial contributions would be appropriate. And broadly, what we are thinking there is that where you do this is actually a discrete part of the CBD, so it's not the whole city. It's actually just there's a map in the paper, so it applies to a specific part. Where predominantly we have two-storey offerings. They're not enormous buildings. In general, they're two-storey. There are a few bigger ones as well. But more importantly, the principle is that it applies where a building has been repurposed for residential, but not built taller or wider or bigger, which would definitely place more pressure on services. The theory is that if the building was built to that size once, it was done so having paid for the services that it would require for that size of the building. That is the main principle which would allow council to think about financial contributions differently. And I just wanted to turn you to 3.7, the development of the preferred option, which I think provides a relatively succinct justification for the approach. Happy to take any questions.
Councillor Crown.
Through the chair, actually just out of interest, where else do we use this sort of mechanism, the internal, what is it called?
Practice note.
Practice note. Can you give me an example of other functions that we use it for?
We have developed one for pre-application meetings. So that's where we would be talking about with a developer who wants to do something, and we would have multiple parts of council coming together, and there's an internal practice note of how that should operate and what feedback goes back in what format to the developer, for example. So it's a way of practicing our legal responsibilities, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah. And formalising that, and so everybody transparently understands what we're supposed to be doing there.
Right. Yeah. Thank you.
Councillor Bogue, followed by Councillor Crescent.
Yes, we have talked previously about the possibility of using the now unused civic building for residential development, and it's not included in this map, and I wondered why that was.
I think, well, the map really was to start off conservatively. It is something we could come back to if we wanted to increase that, but it was broadly trying to get the, not bite off too much and include, major, I guess, residential things, but maybe that's something that you could signal to us to come back to you on if you wanted to widen the scope.
And just further to that, Richard, could I suggest that this practice note would apply to conversions of existing buildings, whereas the civic building, we have agreed that would come down and potentially be rebuilt, and something like a accommodation is on the cards there. So this practice note wouldn't apply in that situation anyway. We're talking about a space where an existing building use is converted, not the building itself.
Oh, sorry, I thought it was just a matter of keeping the footprint the same. But yeah, no, I take that. Fair enough. Thanks.
Councillor Crystal.
Through the chair. Richard, just financial contributions, I kind of don't really understand them fully. So when you're saying, is that to do with services and things like that, that people, if they convert to residential, they have to pay extra things? Just so I know what, yeah.
It's a murky world, so you're not alone. Essentially, what happens with a financial contribution is that it recognises that the ratepayer has already paid for or the developments have already paid for the existing developments. So if you have a pipe of this size, it caters for the existing development. If you add more into it via stormwater or wastewater, then you may need to increase the capacity of that pipe. And the financial contribution is only for that extra capacity. So it has to be something that puts more pressure on the existing provision, and that's why using an existing building footprint has some rational reason for not applying the financial contribution, because you could well ask the question, well, what extra is there given that it's in the same footprint? And you're really slicing and dicing between a commercial use and a residential use. So does that help?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not seeing any further speakers. Would anyone like to move the officer's recommendation? Councillor Wise, seconded Councillor Price. Councillor Wise. Mayor Wise. Throwback. It's a throwback.
Through the chair, look, I'm really excited, to use the buzzword of the day, about this particular move forward and change in process to actually enable us to remove some barriers for our community as a whole. Inner city living is something that I am quite passionate about. I really want to see council helping to facilitate in any way we can a really vibrant CBD. And we do have a number of empty commercial spaces, which I'm sure if we can assist developers and even individual community members, we're not just talking about commercial developers here. I know people that are looking to do this themselves. So however we can help them to do that, to me, is a win-win for everybody. And it's not just about, the vibrancy of our CBD. We do have a huge challenge on our hands with regards to housing and the shortages. So this is another way to also work towards finding some innovative solutions to provide more houses for our community. So I'm absolutely, over the moon to be supporting the motion before us today.
Thank you, Mayor Wise. Councillor Price.
Just a couple of things. I'm very enthusiastic about this. I just did a quick Google just to get an alternative. This is well due, and I think that it was on discussions 5 or 6 years ago, and I was on council when we okayed against some councillors' recommendations that we allowed a building to be altered, and as a result of that, we did talk there that we need to get a discretion so that we can move forward on this. It's if we hadn't have okayed the change I'm talking about, it wouldn't have gone ahead, and it would have been a bit of a sad loss for the city. So I think that it's well due, and well done for getting it to this point. And I think, as you said, we can expand off it, but let's get it working in the area we're talking about. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Price. Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, I'm not excited about it at all. I'm quite enthusiastic as well. But yes, I'm very supportive, and like Councillor Price can recall the discussion when we did make an exception a number of years ago. And I would just like to think that if this is or does work in invigorating and the CBD, Central Napier CBD, that consideration is given to other parts of the city, including Taradale, because there are, again, buildings there that now have their upstairs, where there had been office space in the past, now vacant. And I think the opportunity, as the Mayor has said, we have a lack of housing, and this could be spread across the city. There are numerous buildings that could be utilised for development or alter of use. So I'd like to see it expanded into the future.
Can we record that as an action to come back to council, further expansion of the practice note? To expand the practice note to investigate other centres, including Taradale.
Including Taradale.
There you go.
But Marie was the same.
Excuse me, Chair. Perhaps in general, other precincts, areas.
Yes.
A good example would be Marewa.
I agree. There is an option for you to include an amendment to that effect, Councillor Taylor, if you'd like that included in this practice note.
In the recommendation?
In the recommendation.
Would you like to write it, or endorse the development of a practice note for planners that will provide additional guidance in the assessment and application of financial contribution conditions on resource consents applying to residential developments within Napier.
Would you be comfortable with that, Mr. Miniker, that we leave it open to within Napier at this stage? And of course your practice note is coming back to us, so that gives you some discretion to identify areas specifically in the practice note.
Through the chair, I had in my head that we might be able to come back with maps in between now and through the double debate period to the full council consideration.
Could we change that to...
So I don't know quite how to write that, but...
inappropriate, sorry, not inappropriate, but inappropriate areas?
Yeah. Yeah, and then we'll furnish those
Yeah.
prior to the council meeting.
That sounds good. How does our governance feel? Within appropriate areas of Napier? Yeah. So are the mover and seconder, being Mayor Wise and Councillor Price, happy with that wording?
I'm just a little concerned if we're being a bit too broad in that, but happy to be guided by you, Richard, if you...
What I'm thinking is that the areas which I think you're talking about is basically upstairs of shops, and so I think if we come back with those areas in the maps, I think we should be okay.
So perhaps if we actually just specify that in the recommendation that it's appropriate areas of Napier as identified in the attached maps. Or
Yeah.
so, yeah.
To come.
Yep. It's to come, yeah.
Should we do a B and just note that additional maps will be provided prior to the final adoption to identify those areas?
Can I just comment? I'm quite happy with the original. We've got 6 weeks to be able to hold it and put a bit of thought into it, rather than just a reactive It's answering the point that Councillor Taylor's come up with, but
Okay.
a bit of research before it.
I don't want to revert back because it's too specific to the city centre. So we need to have something in there that indicates that we will consider other areas that are appropriate outside the city centre.
Yeah. Note that additional maps will be provided prior to final sign-off. Sheree? Okay, so we'll revert A to as it was, adding a new B. Sorry, Councillor Brown, I know you do have your hand, but we'll get this sorted first. Just say, note that consideration will be given to other appropriate areas prior to this paper coming back to council. Doesn't matter, yeah. We'll just leave it in there because then Graham's. Yeah. Yeah, before a final resolution of council. Councillor Brown, did you have something?
It's just a question around process. So we're giving direction for this internal practice note to be developed, but then something's going to happen in between now and our full council meeting. Is the practice note going to be developed and we're actually going to do it, or is that the next step?
Through the chair, the practice note is something we could just do.
Okay.
So that doesn't require council sign-off. So, but what this item was to clarify council's intention for the that you're happy with it, basically, and then what it is coming back to is the areas where it applies.
Can I just clarify further, Richard? I think in the report, page 14, you say that the practice note will be presented to council for endorsement. Is that still intended? Bottom of page 14. Under the map. Okay. Okay, that's not the intention. So just to clarify the process for council, so clarifying that point in the report, the intention is that we endorse the development of the internal practice note. We have noted today that we wish that to extend to additional areas, which we've reflected in B. Those additional areas will be brought back to the full council meeting when we look to finally adopt this. This is just a committee recommendation at this stage, and we will not see that practice note again. Staff will then go off and implement the practice note in accordance with the principles that they've mentioned on page 14. All right. I can't see any further hands up. I'll just ask for final confirmation from the mover and seconder. They're happy with the amended motions, which they are. Thank you. So I'll read the wording. Endorse the development of the internal practice note for planners that will provide additional guidance in the assessment and application of financial contribution conditions on resource consents applying to residential developments in the city centre. Note that consideration will be given to other areas of Napier before the final resolution is brought back to council. We have a mover and seconder for that. I believe no one else wishes to speak, so I'll put the motion. All those Councillor Tapane.
Right, I'll raise my left hand, it's a bit hard to see. This is a question to Richard really around, as this kicks off, really exciting, and I did also hear around, this is about helping to define the drive that council will provide to our staff to work in the space. My question was, when you bring this back to us in this initial phase of areas and assessments, will you or the team provide an initial area space and potential number of living spaces and what numbers of homes or residences this might represent, or is that later down the track, even if it's just indicative?
Through the chair, we didn't have that in our minds. More, I think, that these buildings are generally unoccupied at the moment, or the floors are, so that with the idea that occupation is good. Now, how many they can squeeze in there, I'm not quite sure, but we definitely know that there is interest in doing it, but there are some prohibitive costs associated with doing up those buildings, and this is by no means anything like the biggest cost, but it is a small thing that the council can do to help advance that, and we would not see a big rush on as a consequence of this policy, but it may make a few people, give it a go. Yeah.
One further question, if I may. So based on that, because this is all new territory really for us, do we have any indications from building owners or tenants where our inquiries coming from, those building owners and occupiers, or was this just a matter of we've observed that there's a number of empty spaces across our city? This weekend, for example, I was uptown, had that comment with the public who had noticed how many empty floors there were above them. So is this something that's driven by building owners, or just a need that, or an opportunity we've identified to meet a need?
Through the chair, both. So there's definitely been we've definitely had feedback from developers. You say you want the stuff, but you're not actually putting your money where your mouth is, or any providing much incentive for it. But as you know, the council has also, through the city vision, and for years actually, 5 years ago since we did the last one, wanted to go down this side. So it's both. Yeah.
Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you. Are you entering debate or have a question, Councillor
Got a
Bogue?
question.
Right,
that's right. Doesn't matter.
If we could keep it offline, I think, because we're in the middle of debate now, so unless anyone would like to speak for or against the motion, we might push on. Okay, all those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Carried. Thank you. I think we'll move, that's the end of that paper, and we'll move on to item 4, the Resource Consent Activity Report. I'd like to welcome Luke Johnson to present this paper. Kia ora, Luke.
Good morning. Further to my, since our last meeting, I can now provide you a bit of an update around the resource consenting team and the activity that we've seen within that area. Once again, we've seen an increase in the number of applications that we've received since our last meeting, up from 4 in comparison to the same time last year. As detailed within the summary table, there have been a number of noteworthy applications received and approved since the last committee meeting. I'll start with 72 West Quay, which is a new application that we've received and is currently under assessment. The 72 West Quay is the subject site for the proposed mixed-use development. This proposal comprises the demolition of a Group 1 heritage item, ancillary earthworks, and the development of 2 separate buildings. The main building comprises 4 levels, being basement car parking, mixed retail and hospitality uses on ground floor, and residential units within levels 2 and 3. And level 1 is visitor accommodation also. Within the second building, situated toward the eastern corner of the site, it comprises of a ground level retail and office space, and also office space within levels 1 and 2 respectively. Council have engaged a design panel to provide some comments and feedback around the proposed materials and design approach of this development. and the assessment is ongoing. Moving on to 16 and 38 Willowbank Avenue, which has been previously reported to the committee, the Lifestyle Village. This application is now under public notification, which is due to end on the 16th of this month. 11 Hospital Terrace at Napier. Council received, the Resource Consenting Team received a Section 127 application for the variation of previously approved staging of this subdivision. What results is stages 3C and 3D are now divided into stages 3C, 1, 2 and 3 and 4, and stages 3D, 3D1, 3D2 and 3D3 respectively. The alteration to the previously approved staging is for the purpose of achieving a more orderly approach to the development of each respective stage. As requested at the last committee meeting, I can now provide some updates around the Kangara applications that we have received and processed. One being 44 King Street at Taradale is a 1 into 2 lot subdivision and the proposed construction of 1 new dwelling. Now, this application has been approved. The existing dwelling is to be retained and will utilise the existing driveway to access a new vehicle space forward of that dwelling. Ample setbacks are achieved to each of the existing and new dwellings, in addition to suitably orientated private open space. This site is in close proximity to Taradale Town Centre, public transport networks and public open space areas. 16 to 18 Mclaren Crescent at Onikawa is a 2 lot into 5 lot subdivision and the development of 5 dwellings. Since the writing of my report that you see before you, this development has been approved and the development of the site now sees 2 existing properties being subdivided into 5 lots. Not dissimilar to King Street, this site is in close proximity to local schools, convenience shopping, services and also public transport network. Recently we have received another application which is currently under assessment for 44 Venables Avenue at Onikawa. This proposes a new dwelling and a supplementary unit. The application is currently under assessment by the Resource Consenting Team with the expectation of determination being made in due course. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Luke. I just had a couple of questions, if that's all right. So on the West Quay development, I note you mentioned the design panel has been engaged there to undertake an assessment. I'm just interested, what triggers the requirement to get the design panel in? Is that the heritage component or the zoning?
I don't believe it's the heritage component. And my understanding is that due to the zoning and its location, Council's City Vision Framework identifies the benefits of engaging with the design panel, and especially within this waterfront area of Ahuriri. The design panel has been operational for many years and is responsible for the successful and iconic West Quay restaurant and bar area. So it's something that we rely upon their feedback regarding design and materials proposed within the development.
Thank you. And my only other further question was the variation to the hospital health site,
Yes.
the change of conditions application, that was non-notified?
Yes, it was.
Thank you. Councillor Price.
Could you tell me who's on the design panel for West Quay, please?
Through the chair, I don't have their names at this point, though I could get back to you with those.
Could you tell us their location, where they're from?
Through the chair, they are a group of local architects that have formed a panel. This panel has been in existence for some time. Who they are specifically, I can't say at this point.
Thank you, Luke. If we could just mention that as a note to be circulated, the names of the panel. Councillor Bogue.
Yes, through you, Madam Chair. Are the 44 Venables and Mclaren Crescent Kangara developments?
Yes, they are.
Councillor Tapani.
To you and through you, please, Madam Chair, just with regards to 722 West Quay, I'm aware that that site has huge cultural significance and wondering how we might be going around ensuring we achieve confidence.
So a question from Councillor Tapani around the cultural impact. Any assessments submitted as part of the application for that site and whether that's a consideration in processing?
Through the Chair, yes, it is a consideration. The applicant has submitted archaeological significant reports and assessment of those, the significance of that site, and it is something that we're currently assessing. Additionally, Heritage New Zealand has also provided comments and proposed conditions to the applicant in relation to the proposal.
Thank you, Luke. We look forward to being kept updated on the next report. Yes, Mr Miniker.
Through the Chair, just getting back to a previous question, Jacob Scott and Chris Ainsworth are the two people on the design panel. And there was a third one, but they've retired and gone to Auckland. So it's only those two at the moment.
Just for the purpose of minutes, it was Jacob Scott and
Chris Ainsworth
on the design panel. Thank you. That negates the need to circulate. There being no further questions, I ask for a mover of the report. Councillor Crown and Councillor Price. Anyone wish to speak? No. Right.
I've just got a comment.
Councillor
Just
Price.
on what we've just spoken about, the design panel, and I think there's been a change in the design panel as a result of a change in planners. And I think the design panel you've got is pretty good, because I was involved in West Quay under the previous regime, and there were some decisions that were difficult to understand and actually were brought up at a meeting I was at last night to do with the Ahuriri West Quay alteration, which were critical of those old directions given by the design panel then. Thank you.
Thank you for that endorsement. Right, there being no further speakers, all those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Carried. Right, we move on to our last item, thank you, Luke. The unconfirmed minutes of the Hawke's Bay Civil Defence Emergency Management Group. Moved by Councillor Simpson, seconded.
Right.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, and I suppose I'm probably going to have to direct this to you, Councillor Simpson, as our representative on there. I was wondering and Mayor Wise, so both of you, either. How is this group funded?
The governance group, do you mean, or the emergency management group itself?
Well, there was a note in the minutes around current unbudgeted expenditure and talking about perhaps an increase to a targeted rate. So probably 2 years ago now, or a year ago, the civil defence groups were consolidated under the Hawke's Bay Regional Council. They did used to sit individually within each council. So the Hawke's Bay Regional Council now has a targeted rate to fund Hawke's Bay-wide civil defence emergency services. Great, thank you.
Thank you. I do have a mover for the report, so I call for a seconder, Mayor Wise. Any other speakers to the paper? There being none, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Carried. Thank you. That brings our meeting.
Just a note on that, those minutes were actually confirmed by the Joint Committee last Monday.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Simpson. Noting they've been confirmed now. Meeting closed.